Good morning everyone. We're going to be doing a palette knife painting of the sunflower reference image today, all pixels royalty free. So if you want to have a go, you can go onto the link below and print off your version or bring it up on your computer and paint from that image. Now to get started, you're first of all going to need some decent thick paper. I've got 240 GSM cartridge paper that I've done this project on. You can use other papers that will take quite a thick paint, so do remember it's going to be a thick paint with the acrylic. You might find that you want to go for an acrylic paper. It's up to you. So first of all, you're going to need a charcoal pencil and a tissue to do your drawing, which we're going to move on to in a moment. Then once you've got that, you're going to start colour mixing. So for the colours I've used today, I've got cadmium yellow, lemon yellow, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, black, cadmium red, crimson red and white. And then I've got some plastic palette knives because I quite like the plastic ones. I find them easy to handle. You are going to need a palette. You can see mine has been busy from this project, just out the recycle bin, and a pot of water with a brush. You might find easier for mixing colours. It is optional. You'll see what I mean as we get onto the project. I've also used some talcum powder. Any brand will work to thicken up my paint. There are other options, which again I'll put the details in the link below. So first things first, let's get on with the drawing, shall we? Right, so the first thing we've got to do is get started on the drawing. I've got the reference image to my right and I've got a charcoal pencil here. I'm just going to start sketching in these flowers. Now if you look at this is the main one pointing towards you. You've got a nice circle shape there. So you can put that circle in. It's slightly off centre, so if that's the middle of the picture, you can see that's slightly off centre, so I need to be putting that over here. I'm holding my pencil towards the end and getting that shape in there. Then I've got obviously some other ones, so I'm looking at this angle here, bringing that over, and I've got like roughly a shape here of an eye. We have some petals that are going to be kind of coming over here in an arch shape. That comes into there. Then I've got a few bits of green around here, a few stems. I think there's one that's kind of angled, and then I've got this other flower which is kind of more ovally shaped over here. Now that kind of comes, yeah, around there, and then there should be a little yellow one poking up around the back. You can see how simple I'm keeping the drawing, and I'm just plotting in the basic shapes. Once I've got that basic shape in, then I'm going to start drawing in a little bit more tighter, not too tight because we're going to be doing palette knife painting, therefore it's going to end up being quite loose. So there's no point in investing a huge amount of time and energy into detail because it's going to get covered up. So first of all, I'm going to get that rough shape in, and I'm holding my pencil a little bit more closer to the middle. Now I get a bit more control over it, and I'm looking at drawing in that darker centre shape. Okay, then I'm going to have obviously some petals coming around, and I'm keeping it very loose. I'm not too worried about accuracy, I'm just kind of looking at scale and position, direction that I want the petals to take. Okay, now I've got a few bits of the green stalk and where it comes into the flower, and I can see some triangular shapes. You can see like triangles here and here. Get those up and that in. And coming up, I've got a leaf, tucking it around here. Then I'm going to start hitting this flower over here. So let's look at putting in the rough shape around the edge. Then I'm bringing into the centre because there's quite a deep, thick layer of petals that are going to be coming over here. And those come up and around. ones around here. Then let's get those stalks in. I've got this other stalk that's going to come up over here. Just leaving me a few leaves just tucked around there. Then I've got this stalk coming in over here. You can see my pencil's getting a bit blunt, so I'm just going to sharpen that. Okay, so let's get this in here. So I can see that fold back of where the flower comes into the stem. Then this comes up, there's some flicks around here, and it's zigzagging kind of around here. So my eye has been kept on here more than here, okay? That's the trick with good drawing. Then we've got lots of petals just coming in around here. Just like so. Obviously we've got that leaf is sitting in here as well. So let's get that down like so. And that's pretty much everything. So I'm going to go over that a little bit tighter, because next I need to get a tissue and wipe off my excess charcoal. Right, so I've got a tissue. I'm just going to take off the dust so I don't get the cross-contamination when I'm painting. But I've got, you know, strong enough lines to guide me on my colour position and direction of marks. Now that I've done that, I need to get my paint and everything ready. So what we need is obviously a palette, and I've just got a palette there out the recycle bin. I've got some palette knives. I've also got some Johnson's talcum powder. You could use any talcum powder you want. You could use other things that I've put on the list as well. This is going to thicken the paint and make it more pliable for palette knife painting. Then you're going to need your colours. So I've got cadmium yellow, lemon yellow, cadmium red, crimson red, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, black and white. And from that we're going to make lots of different colours. You may find that you need more than one palette. You know, we'll go along with it and see how things work out. It is difficult with palettes with ridges like this when you're working with palette knives, so you might aim to have something that's flatter for easier mixing accessibility. So let's pour some colours out and get going, shall we? Now, because I'm working on a little palette, I'm going to just work light to dark and slowly build up through it. So I've got my cadmium yellow down here, and I've also got my lemon yellow up here. Now, when you're going to thicken up acrylics, it is always wise to mix the colour that you want and then add in anything that you're, you know, any mediums to do various things, whether it be to slow down the drying time, to thicken up the paint. I'm going to use a brush to make the colour that I want, and I'm going to work with my light yellows first. So I've got a bit of cadmium yellow with some white. With palette knife you will find that you get through the paint quite quickly. You're using it very thickly, so always mix a bit more than you anticipate needing. That way you'll find it a lot easier and you don't run out of the colour and have to try and remix it. Now I've mixed some colour. Now you want to take whatever you want to use to thicken up your paint, and I'm going to add a little bit over here, pick up a little bit of talcum powder and stir that into my paint. Now when you're adding a medium, it can slightly alter the colour. If you're using French chalk, that bleaches out colour, for instance. So keep an eye on it. You may have to add something else back into the paint to give you the strength of saturation with the colour. You can see how much thicker that is getting, like double cream. Okay, the You'll find that palette knives come in various shapes and sizes. These are just plastic ones. I personally prefer the plastic over the metal. I'm good at bending the metal ones and snapping the heads off, where the plastic seems to have a little bit more wiggle room on the head movement. So it's completely up to you. They also don't rust. If they get dirty, they're just, you know, you can clean them off really easy. So they're like a lazy person's tool, really. But, you know, I'll go with it. Now, with this, if you look at the type of marks I'm going to be looking at getting, they're quite small for these petals. So I'm going to be looking at using a shape head that suits that. This shape head fits quite nicely. You can get slightly smaller heads, but this one should be fine. When you're loading up the paint, think about the type of mark you'll get depending on where you load it. So if you load up paint along here and then you control the paint, the palette knife in that direction, you're going to get a parallel kind of mark line going towards that direction. If you load the paint on here and pull down, you're going to get more of a triangular shape, kite shape. So how you hold the palette knife and where you put the paint all leads to different types of marks for your artwork. You do need to be considerate about this. So I'm going to take some, put it on the top, okay, just like so. I'm going to hold it like this. You can see that I can press down, and then I'm going to come over and do some work on these petals. Now, I'm going to just shape the petals quite loosely. And then I can pick up a bit more. And because it's acrylic, it'll dry fairly quickly, and I can layer darker tones on top. You do need the paint fairly thick, or you will find, because yellow is a translucent colour, you will see the charcoal guidelines that you put down initially. Right, so I'm going to repeat the same process for the main sunflower. I'm going to plan on layering up, because don't worry about this dark middle, we're going to put the dark middle in a minute. Now what you can do with this, which is quite nice, because the paint is thick, you can grab a little bit of another yellow and work that in to the wet yellow that you currently have on the surface. Right, so by adding white into a paint, white is an opaque paint, yellow is a translucent colour. That means that when you add the white in, it'll block off more of what can be seen through the paint. So if you've got dark lines underneath, by adding a white opaque colour, well, white opaque paint into the mix, that will give you a much stronger coverage of the base layer. You see here I'm just mixing up some quickly to do some flowers up here. Also with the acrylics, the thicker the layer of paint, the longer it takes to dry. Now it won't take forever, it's not like oils takes even longer, don't get me wrong, but it will definitely increase the amount of time you've got to blend other colours into that shade. So this gives you a little bit more flexibility as well. So you can see how I've started to put in some other yellows. I've got my cadmium yellow in a bit more of a neat form in certain patches. So do think about the type of marks, how you're handling the palette knife, and therefore the petals that you can achieve and the shapes you can achieve with those petals. Now the other thing you can do is scratch into the paint, because it's now very thick. It makes it quite pliable. So you can hold the palette knife in different ways and scratch through and end up with a few different lines and marks. You might find that you want to also add in some of the other yellow. So I've got some of the lemon yellow just up here that I'm going to thicken up with a little bit of powder. Give some beautiful, lively, draped over petal marks. Work back into here if you want. What will probably happen is we'll do the dark centre and then we'll work up, do a little bit more petal work on top just to fine tune it. So you can see there, the basics are down. Now that we've got that down, I need to allow it to dry before I do anything in the middle, because if you do anything in the middle and you catch this, it's going to start draping it into the centre of the flower and lightening it, and we want it nice and dark. Now what I can do is I could do the green if I wanted to, or you could do the blue background. Do remember, if you're doing the background, that you do need to lean sometimes on the surface of the paper, so that it can be a bit difficult. You will probably need to allow it to dry before you move on to the next stage. But on the other hand, if you do the background, then you let that dry, then you can work into the green and then you can overlap the green a little bit more with the background. So I'm going to go in and do a little bit of blue. Right, so let's get a palette and tube out a few colours. Right, so what I've done is I've got a little bit of cobalt blue, and I've added in some white as well. Now I don't really want this as thickened as the petals, I want it a little bit thinner, so I haven't added in any of my talcum powder, and I'm going to start working in the background. Now because I'm going to lean on it as I'm going to work on the top left hand corner because I'm right handed, and work diagonally across. Obviously if you're left handed you might want to work the other way, it's however comfortable you feel handling it. Now remember how I told you about putting the paint on? I've moved up to a bigger head, and I'm going to just gently work that into the background. And you should be a little bit aggressive with it so that it's quite a nice smooth consistency. Now for the areas around the petals you might want to change head, or if you're feeling bold and confident you can go in with what you've got already loaded up with paint. You can see there, I'm just turning the palette knife around so that I can get into various different parts of the artwork. And I'm going to go around the petals, well, around the petals, around any leaves, around the stem, because if I put the blue down, then I know that when the light comes through and I put the green on top of it, it's going to kind of slightly cross-contaminate and darken it. So I'm trying to be careful where I might put green in future. Now handling this is a lot like icing cakes, so anyone who's got a cake background should be really good at it. Don't worry about going too close to the petals. I'm going to go in and just boost those up towards the end. So if you do catch the petal with a little bit of blue, it's nothing to worry about. I'm just going to let that dry for a little while because it's going to cause various problems if I lean on it and take it off. You could use a hairdryer and give it a blitz and that would soon do it, but I'm just going to go and have a cup of tea. I'll see you in a moment. Bye! Right, so what I've done is I'm now mixing up my greens, and I've taken some cobalt blue. I've added my cobalt blue into my yellow, well that was a cadmium yellow and white mix to get this very light spearmint kind of green. Then I took my cobalt and added it into my cadmium yellow to get quite a natural mid-tone green, not very dark, just a nice mid-tone green. And then I put some of the cobalt into my lemon yellow as well and got a little bit more of a zappier, brighter green. So I've got 3 greens. I've also added a little bit more talcum powder into them just to thicken them up. I might end up adding a bit more as we go along. Now just like when we were working with petals, working light to dark. So I'm going to get that lighter spearmint green, and I'm looking on here where I'm getting that. Okay, and I'm going to start putting that down here. Now I'm putting it on with one side of the knife, so you can see I'm putting it on that side, and then I'm just using the whole length of the knife to then spread it out evenly. Now I'm leaving a little bit of a side because I want to put a bit of darkness down one side. So I'm also going to look at putting in a little bit over here. Okay, and I've got a few green bits sticking out around here, so let's just add those in. Right, so now that I've got those lighter tones in, I'm going to start building up to a little bit more of a darker tone. So I'm getting a tissue, I'm wiping my palette off clean, and then I'm going to go in for a little bit more of a sappier green, which was my cobalt blue and lemon yellow. Anything with a lemon in it, a yellow mix, is going to be quite strong, so do keep that in mind. Remember, this is palette knife painting, so it is going to be fairly loose. Don't worry if you're kind of going over the lines and it's a little bit different from the reference image. It's all part of how the work evolves and becomes unique to your style and nature for painting. Now I'm going to take that other green, and like I said, you could wipe the knife or you can keep a little bit of cross-contamination from that colour you were just working a minute ago on your palette knife. You could change the palette knife that you're working on. And get different shapes and patterns coming off. You can see here I'm pushing out as well. I can put the knife on and then push it out. And again, I can scrape in if I want to create a more textured mark. And you should see that some flowers are starting to come through just like that. So let's put in a little bit on the centre, and then it's going to be building things up and introducing a little bit more of a tonal change, a bit of colour contrast. So to put in the centre colour, we need to mix a very dark brown. If you take a black and a cadmium red, you will get a very dark brown. Another way of doing it is mixing all three primaries. So a crimson red plus an ultramarine blue, then introduce a cadmium yellow, you'll also get a dark brown. So let's mix up a brown and get into that centre section. Now you'll start seeing, once you mix the red into the black, okay, it'll start going brown. If you want to lighten that brown so that you get more of a different option for the centre, you could always pick up a cadmium yellow, add in a little bit of cadmium yellow, and that will lighten your brown. So it's better to start, just like we was doing before, the lighter then into the dark. So you might want to lighten brown, put that into the centre, and then add in some darker brown. I'm using a smaller palette knife head, and I'm going to start putting that in to the centre of my flowers. Being very slow, very gentle and careful with this. Take your time, don't rush. Right, so you can take some black, add a little bit more black to get some darker areas, and work in a little bit more of a darker tone so you get a two-tone centre, which will look much more natural. So you can see I'm pushing it down and getting a very different mark. I'm just scraping it across. Right, so now what we've got to do is make some darks and start building up those darker areas. So I've got some ultramarine blue and some cadmium yellow. I'm going to take some of the ultramarine blue and mix that in. Now the more blue I add, the darker this green is going to become. And I do want it fairly dark, so I am adding a fair bit of blue into the yellow. Do make a decent quantity, because like I've said before, and you probably found this out now after doing the other layers, you can get through a lot of paint with palette knife painting. So, but because the blue is a much stronger colour than the yellow, you would introduce the blue into the yellow, which means you can control the tone of the green that you are achieving. You can see that's quite a strong dark green compared to what I've got already on the surface. So now with that, I'm going to start building up, using my palette knife, some of the darker areas of green. And the trick here is just to take it slowly. Okay, don't rush, because you don't want to overwork these and lose all the light tones that you've built in the earlier stages of the artwork. But do keep it still loose. Don't get too kind of bogged down with trying to be a perfect painting. So it's really coming together now. I'm going to make up a little bit of an orange just to zap up some of the petals on the sunflower, because the green is quite powerful. It needs a colour to really draw the attention. So a little bit of cadmium yellow with some cadmium red will make a nice orange, and then just palette knife that onto your petal area so that it gives a bit more of a zappy kind of coloration. So again, I'm taking the red and I'm introducing that into the yellow, because the yellow will go orange with very small amounts of red added in, and I don't want it really orange. The more red you add, the stronger and the darker the orange will become. If you wanted to, you could lighten this by adding in a little bit of white, just softening it up. It's up to you, it's all kind of personal preference. Then you can use your palette knife just to work in a little bit of a zappy orange colour contrast with your petals. If you wanted to, you could add in a little bit more yellow and go over areas if you feel that, you know, it's a little bit messy and you wanted to crisp it up with the detail. It's kind of open to any artistic interpretation you want to give it. So you see here, I'm just working this in like so. And the nice thing with the acrylics is that if you do something and you're not too happy about it, just let it dry. And you can come back and add in a little bit more colour and cover up any errors. It's very forgiving. So this is kind of where I'm at. I've done mine quite quickly. Obviously you could be building up more colour mixing in yours, and you can be scraping through the layers, building up loads of gorgeous textures by how you're handling your palette knife and giving it your own unique style. That's what art's all about, your style, not copying someone else's. So use this as just a springboard to experiment and find what works for you. Obviously you could have a lot more fun with this, but I'm going to stop here because I've got to move on to the next project, and I'll see you soon. Have some fun, get the paint all over the place as you'll find with palette knife it usually does, and I'll see you next week. Bye everyone.